those of us who are on the eastern seaboard, you may well have been managing many other competing priorities with rain and floods at the moment. So thank you very much, and a very warm welcome. I would like to begin by kicking off and by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land upon which each of us are joining today, and in particular the Ngunnawal people from the Canberra region where I am. I'd also like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and to thank them all for their role in being our nation's early teachers. As I mentioned before, there are a number of people joining us today. The response has been incredibly positive, and I thank you again for your interest in the webinar series. This particular webinar is the second one in a series of webinars which Australian Schools Plus is hosting, focused around student mental health and wellbeing. And in particular, the presenters for our
I'm calling in response to a message that I got about something to do with money being debited from my...
Okay, terrific. There was just a break in with a message there someone was taking. So thank you for placing yourself on mute. As I say, this is the second webinar of a series of 5 webinars that Schools Plus will be hosting during semester 1. All of them are in that general theme of student mental health and wellbeing, but with a particular focus. Today's webinar, of course, being presented by Warren, is focusing on embedding positive education across the curriculum. If I could just, as I do get going, I'm not so sure how many of you are familiar with the work of Australian Schools Plus, but so just a little bit of background before I introduce Warren further. Australian Schools Plus is a national not-for-profit which was set up a little over 7 years ago with the objective of leading change and helping schools to lead change and to help close the education gap. And since our commencement, as I say, a little over 7 years ago, we've worked with incredibly generous donors, generous philanthropists to distribute over $17 million to schools across the country, particularly in communities where disadvantage exists. About 850 schools now we have reached, and through that, over 250,000 of students. As I say, all students and all school communities that particularly in communities where some level of disadvantage exists. So it really is our honour and a real privilege for us to be here today and to be able to bring together one presenter in Warren who is a part of the work that we do, particularly through our work with the Commonwealth Bank in recognising some high achieving principles. Sorry, my apologies. I just need to go away and cough. Just one moment. My apologies, everyone. I'm just struggling with a little bit of a sore throat today, so my sincere apologies for that, for me having to step away. But if I can just continue on. As I was mentioning, I did talk very briefly about the work of School Plus and our focus, really the focus of our work is particularly in supporting schools to deliver projects designed to bring about lasting change. And our support includes that of financial resources and also coaching focused on capacity building in those schools, as well as opportunities like today to come together and learn from one another. One of the programs that we support, as I did mention just before, somewhat clumsily, my apologies again, is our support for the Commonwealth Bank Teaching Awards. The Teaching Fellows alumni, which is drawn from the awards, is a group of teachers and school leaders who have been recognised for their achievement in schools across the country. And it is my absolute honour today to introduce and welcome Warren Symonds as our guest presenter, who was one of the 2020 Teaching Fellows. Warren is a leader both within and beyond his school community. He's a visionary and an enormously generous contributor to the profession and a highly regarded principal at Mount Barker High School in South Australia. Today, Warren will share how the wellbeing of his school community has been strengthened by making positive psychology and practice an integral part of everything they do: curriculum, policies, procedures, and relationships. Warren will particularly focus on how their school community has embedded positive education across the curriculum, as I mentioned previously. And when combined with really high impact teaching and learning strategies, has had a really positive impact on their student learning outcomes. He'll talk about what POSED looks like at their school across the curriculum and at different levels. He'll also reflect on and use the evidence and measurements that they have been looking at to both determine what the needs are and also to measure their impact. He'll also share some insights around professional learning and supporting their school community, particularly their staff and family members, to come along that cultural journey with them. And also looking at and reflect on ways in which they have been able to sustain that change. Pardon me. Following the presentation, we will have the opportunity to have Q&A. We'll aim to leave most of the questions until that time, and I do again thank those people who have submitted questions before. We have passed those on to Warren, so hopefully he'll be able to respond to those either through the presentation or afterwards. But can I invite you, if you do have questions throughout the actual presentation, please pop them into the chat function, and we'll certainly collate those and then facilitate that conversation at the end. So please use that function. It's a great way of getting the conversation going at the end as well. Can I also just mention, for those people who are interested, and perhaps for colleagues who may not be able to join at this time, we will be recording the presentation, and we'll share this with you shortly after the event, probably within the next week or so, I think. So can I, at this point, perhaps take the moment just to remind everyone to, if you haven't already, to mute your sound. If you would like to post a question, please do. And of course, if you do have a burning question, please don't hesitate to jump in, and I'm sure Warren will be very happy to respond there. And on that note, Warren, I'm going to hand over to you. And again, apologies, folks, for a little bit clumsy introduction there. Over to you, Warren.
Well, thank you, Bron, and thank you very much for that wonderful welcome and introduction of me. And hopefully I can actually, throughout this presentation, live up to that wonderful expectations and the words you said. The honest part of me, I'm a rank beginner in using Zoom and online learning, because unfortunately or fortunately in South Australia, we actually didn't have to do this very often. So what I'm going to do is, would you please excuse my ignorance if I make a few mistakes, but I'm going to jump right into it. And whilst I'm jumping into sharing my screen, I can find the right presentation, we'll go forward. I'd really like to thank Schools Plus for the wonderful opportunity and the work that they do of supporting schools throughout South Australia. Mount Barker High School has been one of those wonderful schools that's been well supported by Schools Plus, and the support of Commonwealth Bank and the involvement in Commonwealth Bank in improving educational outcomes for all young people in Australia. Just to start off my presentation is going to be dealing with positive education across the curriculum. And what I want to do is acknowledge that the land that I'm meeting on today is the land of the Parramatta people. The Parramatta people are known in the Adelaide Hills as the fire starters, not in the wrong way, but in the way that they provided other Aboriginal communities pyrite, which is the information sitting behind flint. So they actually, part of their trading methods was actually provide flint to all other Aboriginal families and cultures around South Australia. They also were very strong in trading ochre. So the picture you see is part of Parramatta land, and I pay respect to past, present and future generations, and invite all Australian, all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders welcome to this presentation. My presentation today is going to cover a couple of areas. So I'm going to look at the context, how we improve the culture in the school, how we implement some of the POSED approaches across the school, curriculum examples, some staff parent activities. What did we do during COVID-19? Does it really work? And hopefully I can show you some evidence of where POSED has actually supported the growth in young people in Mount Barker High School. And what are we doing in 2021, and where you can find more information, because that's one of those pressing areas that most people ask about, is how did you do this and where did you get that information? So really, to start off with, Mount Barker High School is in South Australia. So for our international guests, Adelaide, the driest country, or driest state in the driest region of Australia. And we're located 32 kilometres outside of Adelaide. And we actually live in the very leafy suburbs of the Adelaide Hills, so nice rolling flats. And we're actually, the Mount Barker region is one of the fastest growing regions in South Australia. And just in Mount Barker alone, there's going to be about 15,000 new families moving to the local area in the next 5 to 10 years. So it's a significant growth area, very old traditional town. So arguably, when we look at Mount Barker High School was founded in 1908. So we believe, and we argue with another school in South Australia, we're the first public high school in South Australia. So the history of school dates back, and we've been able to provide the young people in Adelaide Hills 112 years of schooling in the secondary setting. Just to give you an idea of what the combination of Mount Barker High School looks like, and I'm going to go through this fairly quickly, is that we're a traditional public high school with an 8 to 12 campus, co-ed. Our Exia rating is 99.99 of 992. It varies quite often with the cohort of students. It's been down very close to 900, and as we say, we're rising up into nearly the 1,000 mark. We actually have an off-site campus. I have 80 students located about 1 kilometre away from the school, and that's a re-entry campus. We realised about 12 years ago, there were a lot of students that were disengaging from high school, and this campus is the last opportunity for these young people to actually gain an education. And last year we had 15 graduate, and 2 of them have gone to university. So a very successful program. We have a disability unit with 26 students, some with high needs, wheelchair, physical mobility, and non-verbal. We have a trade training centre, part of the trade training area. The school focused on electrotechnology and cabinet construction. Also was pathways to nursing, Cert 3 in music, and a whole range of other areas. We have an agricultural centre, and we actually have an Indigenous academy, which is at the academies, which is called South Australian Aboriginal Sports Training Academy, and that's located in the school, and that caters for all Aboriginal Muatsi students from Victor Harbour all the way over to Burwood. So it's in a radius of around about 100 kilometres, or about 100 kilometres around the school, so 50 k's each way, that we cater for young Aboriginal people coming into the school for working.
Sorry, Warren, I just can't see your, I'm not sure if it's only me, I just can't see your presentation on the screen.
Hon, that's not on the screen at the moment?
I can't see it. I'm seeing some shaking heads from videos as well.
Right.
No, it's not, Warren.
Can't be
So
seen.
it's not on. So, right. This is where I told you I'm a rank beginner. So, share. How about that one? How does it look now?
Yep, you got it.
Right. Okay. Told you. If we're going to make a mistake, I'm going to do it in a public forum. So, learning about. So, what I'll do is quickly go back and just show you. I'll just go back a few slides from the beginning. I'll quickly go through what you missed out on. So there's the Parliament land that I meet on. So quickly my overview. This is where Adelaide's located. If you're for an international guest, this is where the school's located. So we can go through on that aspect. The history of the school, the centennial path. 1908 was school was founded, first school in South Australia, I argue, and I was up onto the context of the school. So I apologise for that. So to give you an idea, we're actually still in the secondary setting. We're quite a small secondary school of 764 students, but you can see the demographics of the breakdown of the students in the school. Next year, we're going to go through a significant growth because of South Australia. We have year 7s coming on board. And so we're moving to a school of 1,070 students. The year after that one will be about 1,150. And it'll probably plateau at the moment over the next, say, 4 years to about 1,400 students. So significant growth in the area. So there's a lot of work about how do you actually build a school and maintain a small school focus in a large school. So I'm not really going to address that in this one, but I'm going to go back and sort of say, talk a little bit about our journey to get where we are. Matthew would have, if you were fortunate to sit through Matthew's webinar a number of weeks ago, talked about trying to sum up, like his case, 12 years of learning into 20 minutes. I'm trying to sum up 8 years or more of school change in a 20-minute, 30-minute presentation. So I'm trying to cover as much as possible, give you as much information. So we're always available to offer support or advice. It's just a phone call away. So in our journey, we used it in school. We used when I was lucky enough to meet Martin Seligman and talk to him on numerous occasions early in our journey. And Martin, when I challenged him about saying, how do we actually introduce positive education into a school? He just said, there's 3 simple things: learn it, live it, and teach it. So from Martin's point of view is, or Marty's point of view is actually that's what we should be doing. So as a school, we took on board that. So we went through a journey of let's learn it, let's live it, and let's teach it. And so if you want to put it in some educational speak, and if you like Simon Sneak is actually going back through it, is we used, in summary, we used actually the golden circle. We start off with why. And Matthew alluded to it last time, is saying, why did we go down this path? And realistically, it really resonated with all staff. And it was resonated about saying, why did they get into the profession of becoming a teacher in the first place? And it was all about to say, I want to actually guide, aid, I want to support, I want to nurture young people learning, etc. So already on, and when I talk about how we introduced POSED into Mount Barker High School, I do sometimes say it was quite easy because I actually I could drill down to why we were in the profession the first time. And it resonated with the whole staff. And so when we started training and working on that one, we had 100% buy-in from the staff. Now, there were some naysayers who just went along with the journey, but they could always link it back to saying why they became a teacher in the first place. And we found that they had a lot of traction. And then we worked into the how and the what. Happy to share that story as we go along. But as we went through, we covered a whole raft of different areas. Now, we used David Cooper Writer's appreciative inquiry. We started up our professional development plans on strength conversations. We collaboratively workshopped amongst our school, our feeder primary schools, and whoever else we could actually workshop with. Learning, go back to way Marty talks about learning it. We actually released staff for training development. So various staff have attended 4 days, 3 days, 2 days, 1 day training packages, and we targeted make certain that all our teaching staff have undertaken some formal training, and all support staff in the schools also undertaken training. And they are now actually, all our staff are actually involved across the school in introducing positive education. I released staff to write material, to develop material, to pilot curriculum, and we then looked at how we hook students into it. We mapped the whole school curriculum against the PERMA framework and see what was being taught already in schools. And we did a lot of work. So this is 8 years trying to sum up in about 2 or 3 minutes. And we then looked at how do we actually do across the board. So we used a horizontal structure of what we would offer for year 8s all the way to year 12s. We incorporated a lot of student workshops. So our students ran a lot of leadership workshops through using the appreciative inquiry. They trained local primary school leaders in how to be part of the SRC. They worked with other high schools across, and so we offered like even statewide opportunities for students to come into Mount Barker High School to learn about positive psychology, but also to learn about how to introduce and use a strength-based approach in their schools. And this showed a significant increase in student agency. From a school, this was our first site improvement plan using positive education. It's based on the Michael Fulham coherence framework, securing accountability, creating, and we're linking some of the educational theories into it. And you'll notice that there were 4 main areas: embedding positive education, high quality learning, and community connections. So it was really strong across the board that it was a major focus in the school. A quick way of introducing it, what we needed to do was actually to lift the profile of positive education. So this was our first timetable change. And if my mouse works well, you'll notice on a Wednesday, lesson 3, we introduced a 55-minute formal lesson in positive education where all teachers were teaching their year level a 55-minute lesson. So this was actually quite revolutionary for the school because we only really used to use that 5 or 10 minute pastoral care approach throughout the whole year. So it's actually putting a real emphasis on the school that POS Ed is really important to be part of Mount Barker High School. Part of one of our areas of focus for our site improvement was embedding positive education. Here's a very rough board break of what we're actually focusing on. These were our key targets, what we looked at. There was always training of staff. There was always training of outsiders to share this skill across the one. We wanted to improve attendance. We wanted to ensure that 70% of the curriculum had been taught through a POS-Ed framework or POS-Ed approach, and some of the strategies we used. That was from a perspective from the whole school looking at, and that was actually fortunate in my case as being a leader in the school, so it was one of my priorities that we placed into it. It was really well workshopped amongst staff, so it wasn't just Warren talking, it was actually the school talking about how do we actually look at POS-Ed and what does it look like at Mount Barker High School. To support that one, we drilled right down to the learning area. So we're actually looking at learning area mid-level leaders having a leadership responsibility of introducing POS-Ed across the school and into their curriculum. And so here's some examples, and I'll show you how we've actually merged and grown into this area. Most of you would have logged on today to hear about how we've embedded positive education in the school. One of the key tenets in the Mount Barker High School was we aren't really big on programs. We actually want to make things what you'd call authentic. We want to make them part of everyday life because we don't want something to say, walk into a school, we do a day seminar on POS-Ed and then go, right, we've done that, all our kids are going to be better off. We wanted to make certain that we actually use the lens of positive education and how we can actually, how we can embed that across a curriculum. So for example, if I was teaching history, we worked on the word character strengths, and character strengths is actually one of those areas of the 24 strengths that you can actually pick up and use across the whole school curriculum. There's dark sides of doing this too, because you'll find that students get a little bit overboard with character strength and have enough of it. But we can actually use this to work on when you're actually writing essays and analysing work. So for example, with history, we're talking about, in Year 10 history, we talk about the Holocaust, and we talk about possibly the negatives that happened during the Holocaust. And so a bit of a twist on looking at the character strengths. So the history, for example, is just saying, what strengths do people use to overcome adversity? And then if you read down a little bit, one of the things was looking about what did the survivors of the Holocaust and what did the Jewish prisoners use to actually get through the situation they're in. We're still teaching the history side, but we're actually looking at probably from some of the survivors in that one. And this one is actually think about positive self-talk examples. So we can actually look at something that was an atrocity and then build some positive things that came out of it. And so students could actually, when they write their essays, can actually hook onto it. So here's some examples of response from that one. And I'll just leave that on the screen for a couple of minutes, a little bit for you to have a look at it. And just some of the ideas is, when you start looking at teamwork, and as to how the prisoners had to work together. How when we start looking at perseverance is actually what skills did they use to keep on going day after day after day. And then when you're talking about the older prisoners, like fairness, actually saying we share our food with other ones. So they're actually starting drilling down to probably getting a really good picture of what it was to be a survivor of the Holocaust and seeing what is going on. So there's a little simple history example, and you could see some of the twisting of the character strengths that could be weaved through a range of curriculum areas. With outdoor education, we actually have to do a self-reflective written assessment. And so the outdoor education teacher just used the PERMA framework and was asking about getting the students to reflect on the PERMA. So this was a young girl that when you start talking about body conscious or exercise, saying what was a positive emotion about what she was being really excited before the camp. So she could actually write about what she was excited about and then possibly write about what she's self-conscious about, right? And then dealing with it and coming to realise that no one really cared what you looked like in the wetsuit because you actually were out there surfing. So and so they were able to relax on that one. And then talking about relationships on the camp, what type of relationships should be, right? And so you get the lovely one where saying, I didn't think so-and-so really would talk to me, but when we went on camp, we actually started a conversation. I didn't think they were very nice. And then all of a sudden they actually became like not a necessary friend, but we could actually now talk about each other at school. So they could actually talk and reflect on what relationships were developed through the camp. This slide's a little bit messy because it's a Year 12 slide. And so when we start looking at Year 12 English, we've still got to get into that really meaty part about teaching the language. So the slide comes through about how the teachers actually workshop about deconstructing the test, all the language features of a set example. So using the high impact teaching strategies of using exemplar material, highlighting areas in different colours so students can see different parts of the writing style and the genre that the writer's using. How do you introduce it? And here's a task sheet of what we went through. So the idea was they were going to go out to the local restaurant and actually have a dining experience. So, but one of the things that we've thought about when we're actually, before we send them out to the restaurant, is that saying there's got to be some meaning behind it, and there's got to be some skills they could develop when they go into as a critique on a restaurant. So this is something about style and structure of language features. So we're talking about subject-specific vocabulary. So really hardcore, really solid teaching and learning going on, and using what we would call the high-impact teaching strategies. But before the students went out, we engaged them in the sensory eating experience, right? And then we went through some note-taking. So there's some structure, and then you go into, before we took the students out, we used a mystery box, and we're looking at sensories and savouring. And so we gave them an experiment of testing some foods, and they could have been blindfolded, etc. And they wanted to write down and improve their tier 2 and tier 3 vocab in this one. So, for example, we came across all those 4 different types of foods. The students tested it, and this is what they wrote down. They were trying to work out some key words as they're going wrong. So what we're doing is teaching the literacy behind it, but actually teaching them what it is to savour a moment and to actually to recall those moments. So here's some examples the students tried going through after they've actually tasted the fairy floss, etc., and working around down. So the girl I've just shown there, that's her little sheet of writing down the words that she could do. So when they went into the restaurant, they could actually use this as a framework and savour the moment. So they've got something to actually pin their work upon. And here's some of the writing. You can see how it's actually guided the students into to write at a different level than what, and just said, I had steak and chips and it was really nice. It's actually now starting to be creative in their writing and actually change it. So significant change to what they would have done if they just went out and said, we've got to write a journal on food. So that's that one. In mathematics, one of those areas that we stick straight to 1 + 1 = 2. What we'll do is actually start looking at mindsets. And so we can start the year off and give them a whole pile of puzzles, get the students come and play. And then you can talk about what character strengths they used and why they went and chose certain things, and saying, well, actually, when you do mathematics, you can use these strengths to support you in your mathematics. We'll do the example in the classrooms. You'll have a range of visible reminders about what perseverance, what negative self-talk is, and what a growth and fixed mindset is. When you walk around Mount Barker High School, you'll see some motivational quotes all the way through school, and we change those quite regularly, or even simply move the sign, and the students go, well, I haven't seen that one before. So really simple, subtle ones. when we started talking about the self-talk and like a fixed or a negative and a growth and a positive self-talk, we actually had, we piloted with the students a range of throwing a tennis ball into a bucket. And so we had half the class sitting there throwing, well, I broke the class up in half, and we actually had them throwing tennis balls into a bucket. And then we just then got the other half, when we took the other half of the class out after they've done that exercise and talked about what a fixed mindset is, what a growth mindset is, and used the word, I can't do it yet, and using some terminologies. And then we put them back into the group, and there was around about a 3 or 4% growth in the students that had that positive self-talk. And so we were saying, well, yeah, I can't do it yet, but I can actually get there eventually. So some of the language that we use in the classroom. In gratitude and science, no, we're still doing chemistry. So here's an example of actually when you're doing when you're trying to put solids or mixing up compounds, is let's do a bath bombs one. And once you make the bath bombs, you give them to somebody. So it's actually talking about gratitude, pay it forward. No, we know that's one way of improving your personal well-being or your positive emotion is by doing something good for someone else. So we even got the stage where at the end of the year, all our year 8s and 9s actually make Christmas bonbons, and they'll generate their old jokes and all that sort of stuff. They'll make candles, they'll make bath bombs, and they'll do a whole range of things and put them into a bonbon. And then the group of the students will go to all the service support agencies throughout Mount Barker and hand them to them and say, thank you for all the wonderful work you've done for the year. Going into nursing homes and working with elderly people about a range of things. Other areas that we've done in the school is we'll probably go with dance. You'll see when you read this one is actually, it's all about that writing work and the levers you can help and scaffold a young person to improve their writing as they go along. So you'll see in this one, what went well? What are the 3 things you did with your dance when you did your performance? What were some of your challenges? So it's all linking into the strategies behind POSED. We're actually not teaching it as POSED, it's teaching it through the lens of dance. And so we'll always pin it back. One of those ones I was just going to segue off to was actually our year 8s go out to our local primary school for book week and talk to junior primary students about, and we couldn't do it last year, the year before, it was about your favourite character or superhero. And so they interviewed one individual, came back to school, wrote a story about that superhero and personalised the book, did all the artwork behind it, laminated it, and went back to the primary school and sat down with the student and read the story to her and handed them the book. So that paid a bit forward. It was students who are severe dyslexic with learning disabilities just jumped at the opportunity and just embrace that one, and that you could see their leadership, their self-satisfaction going through. I know I'll try to fit too much in this short period of time. Student voice, I already talked about student voice. It's really powerful in the school. We wanted to make it really authentic. So students are invited to be on all subcommittees in the school. They're actively involved in looking at our behaviour management policy and suggesting areas. They provide feedback, 360-degree feedback to all staff members about their work and their performance. And they've moved the school a lot forward. They repeat all the time saying how much the school has changed and what value they've actually got. They've actually seen as part of the school now, excuse me. So some of the fun things to do. Depends what mood I'm in, I'll be honest about that one. I go out and take the birthday snaps of all the kids in school. So there'll be a day where I'll walk into a classroom and say, hey, it's your birthday here. I'll take a selfie and then send it to the parents and say, happy birthday from someone at home. So there's just a random group. You've got it, no, as a principal, all my parents now have got my phone number, but there's a random, you can see there. And the positive comeback from the parents is actually going, how wonderful that is. I'll then sometimes go into the classrooms and photograph their kids at work and then send it to them and say, look, student X is having a great day at school. And it's just showing them what's happening in the school. You've got a lot of schools have got that mobile message board around the area. We got all our staff to do a gratitude page. So that's my page. I spend a lot of time sailing around the place. So showing something about myself that the students may not know about when I sailed a boat back from Sydney and all that sort of stuff, and just sharing some of the racing bit I've been in. And so they got to know sort of the principal on a little bit different level. So they were rolling screens going through the school. It's just an added one. During COVID, that was one wonderful one, is actually how do we move forward? First off is actually in our English area, we actually had our Year 8s write messages to the local community, like new mums, our residents, and they packaged them up and put them in letterboxes and hand delivered them. This was shared to other principals and that throughout South Australia. So just little simple things about saying, no, we know that you're going through a traumatic event. There's a pandemic on, but we're all here together, and no, we care, and no, stay positive. So it was quite simple, the message they sent. When you drill into the language behind it, it was not brilliant in some of the words, but it's actually something that the students really embraced and wanted to do, and they wanted to photocopy and hand out. Later on, you'll be able to have access to this one. This is actually a 10-week POSED course that Jenny Cook, the Deputy Principal at Mount Barker High School, generated. And this is what we use with our families. And so we wanted the whole lot of everyone to get actually involved in POSED, and whilst we were going on. This was actually planned for us to go into lockdown and to do all teaching online. So it's just some ideas behind it. There's a 10-week one. Those are the areas that we focused on. And I know that Bron will actually share some of this information to you as we go along. So more than happy for you to have a look at that and use that. That's there for everyone to use. The question is, does it work? Well, we believe and we know it does work. So we've been surveying our students for about 8 years. This is one of those unusual graphs that you've got to get your head around. You really want low levels of sadness, right? Not the high levels of sadness. So this is one where you read from right to left, and left's good, whereas normally right's better. So you'll notice that what we've done in 16 all the way along, you can see compared this bit here, I think my mouse will show up, showing you the state average, and how we've actually been able to move through a pandemic year of actually being above state average for students with lower levels of sadness. You'll notice that as we go along here is actually an important adult in the school. A lot of staff would say that the students had an important adult in the school. When we surveyed in 13, it was the opposite way around. There was a disconnection with adults. And so you can see as we moved along, we've actually moved quite significantly more students in the school to have an important adult. One of the disclosure of this data is actually we've now slowly been able to bring our students up to the state average. Right? So it's been a lot of work over the years of moving students from pretty low levels of wellbeing up to the average of wellbeing across South Australia. So now we're going to work how we go further. Other areas of optimism, you can see the growth in optimism. You can see here we're still below, but where we were to where we are now is a significant movement across the whole school. What I like about this information is showing you is actually we've been able to track longitudinal the growth of students. So these students were in year 9 and 16 and graduated in 19. I haven't been able to really unpack the 2020 data fully, but you can see that cohort of students actually improved in their 4 years of schooling at Mount Barker High School. We've been connected to the school. Academic self-concept, they actually now could see themselves as learners in school compared to what they were in the past. So significant growth across the school in that aspect. Academic achievement, 2013 is the blue line compared to last year, and we were supposed to go backwards last year with academic achievement of students. So we're now moving our students into the higher level, and the average grade in schools are B to going towards a B plus at year 12. And we don't have this huge tail of students not completing work. So there's some evidence saying it does work. I'm going to run out of time, but what are we doing this year? All right, here's some data that doesn't show greatness. All right, we found that our students didn't belong fully, and we wanted to improve this area here of belonging into the school. So we needed to actually look at something that we could do in the school. So what we've done is we've restructured our whole timetable again. So we've increased, and this is a new one, working more on block time. So for learning, you can go deeper for longer. So you can get students more into flow. We've introduced what we would call a house time. These are now vertically grouped houses. It will be year 7 to year 12, where they have their pastoral care approach. We're maintaining our 50 minutes of formal lessons, but this has actually got more of a mentoring. And so eventually at Mount Barker High School, you may not even hear the word positive education. You'll hear about house, And we're sort of blurring those lines about saying it's part of the DNA of the school. It's what Mount Barker High School is all about. Some wonderful technology we're starting to investigate in the school, the Muse headsets, heart rate monitors, and because what we're finding is students actually want to see whether the strategies we teach them work. And these are some of the tools that we can go on doing it. So for example, with our pastoral care program, I'll just jump out of my presentation, is with our house program, what we've done, hopefully you can see this one, is actually we've mapped and the staff have workshopped over a 3-year period. So when we start looking at when this is a bit slow, is this is some house program of what's term 2, 2021. So we're ready to do it. Who's responsible? What are the resources? What are the wonderful events that are happening around the place, like either Hobbit Day, Mindful in May, and trying to link some of those other activities that's happening around Australia and international things. And then what we've done is actually to develop to support students. This is what I'm not very good at doing. I'm trying to get this other one there. That's what I want, not the one. I then moved
Sorry,
forward.
Warren, I can't see anything. You might have to stop your share and then reshare.
Okay, all right. So what I'll do is I'll go back and hopefully, can you still see our presentation now?
Yeah.
Yeah, all right. So I'll just go back into that slideshow. And so that one, what I was trying to show you then was actually how schools actually, we've got a plan for the next 3 years of what's going to happen in that house time. And what we did earlier this year was actually, we had a whole school closure that all the staff were worked on certain areas of their skill and developed a PowerPoint presentation with what the meaning behind it, the research behind it, and some strategies that's shared amongst the staff. So we're developing that champion approach in the school. To change the learning area improvement focus, we've moved into teaching like a pirate. So here's some examples of what magic you're going to create in your learning area, because we want to actually look at something different instead of, I want to improve the literacy level of the students. I'm going to focus on tier T or TIL or something like that. So we're just playing around with that aspect this year. With the vertical grouping of students, we're finding a significant reconnection with one adult. And moving forward. So I'm not going to run out of time here. So look, if you're really looking for further information, happy to share it. But if you haven't heard about it, PESA, Positive Education Schools Association, is a wonderful resource. And if you actually go onto the PESA website, you'll find that PESA is about equipping members with high quality resources. All right, so this is the sales pitch about PESA. It's there to support schools who are implementing positive education across the board. And one of the best resources which I've actually come across so far is this booklet. All right, it's about $40, and it's from start to virtually where we are, with journeys of schools and information about how do you implement a wellbeing approach in your school. So if you just type www.pesa.org, you'll get through and you'll get information. So that one information, that's the raft of all information that'll go. It'll give you wellbeing definitions, it'll give you frameworks. We followed the PERMA Plus framework because we're working with the research from Martin Seligman, but there's a whole raft of them out there. Now, fortunately, right now, that the information that you can access compared to 8 years ago is chalk and cheese. So there's so much out there now. PESA is a really good one-stop shop to guide you in the right direction. Other contact information, there's my email address, but Bron will actually share that with you. And Jenny's another great resources in the school. From a school's perspective, we've trained over 500 people, 500 teachers throughout South Australia. So if you start looking at the effect, when we first started the approach to this one, our reach was over 3,000 students that had opportunities to actually have improvement in wellbeing. So what I'm going to do now is thank you so much for listening and being part of this webinar. I'm going to stop and I'll hand back to Bron for questions.
Yeah. Warren, on behalf of everyone, thank you. and I think thank you too on behalf of your school community for obviously the fantastic and very impactful work that you're leading.
Pleasure. And
for sharing that with us. Folks, I'd like to firstly just invite anyone to share any questions they may have, or comments or reflections. And if I don't hear from you in a few seconds, then I'll just go straight to one of the questions actually that was submitted beforehand. So would anyone like to lead off with a reflection or comment question? No. If you do share it in the chat. And in the meantime, then I might actually kick off just with the first question. And Warren, I think you sort of have mentioned this, but I will ask the question again, and maybe you can just place a little bit more of a spotlight on it. But one of them was, how is positive education used in terms of managing assessment stress?
Okay, so what we do is when we're programming our POSET approach, we actually look at the key parts of the curriculum, or key parts of the week or the term calendar. And there are moments when we start looking at Year 11 and Year 12 exam stress. So we actually have developed, and we have had some support from a school in Canberra that have developed a pre-exam stress training program. And it really just comes down to the crunch is actually saying it's actually okay to feel nervous. It's okay to feel those butterflies in your stomach. But then how do we deal with that when we actually feel like we get there? So we actually have, through a range of different areas, we're using some psychologists and that to actually develop an approach and how we can actually share that with students. So when we're leading up to our Year 11 and Year 12 mid-year exams, we'll sit down with our students and go through test anxiety and what what you naturally feel, and then how do you can actually build upon your confidence to go over that one. It's not perfect, but we're still getting, we are finding that students are not shying away from subjects with the external exam.
Thank you. Another question here, Warren, and again, I think you have reflected on it, but if you can put a spotlight there, going right back to the very beginning, I guess, you've been on a journey for a number of years now in your school community, but what was the very first step that you took as you began the process?
Yeah, that was that's a really interesting question, because I actually it was hard. Our first step was really hard because the world of positive education was going through, or positive psychology in those days was going through happyology and all that sort of stuff. And now when we start talking about that one, are we going to get in little big circles and hug each other? There wasn't a lot of research that we could get our hands on initially. So we started with using Seligman's Flourish. That was probably one of the best books we could get hold of at the time. And we were actually given the opportunity to work with Marty Seligman in the early stages. So the way that we did it was actually, it was like a drip feeding approach. We shared the literature of Flourish with all the leadership team in the school, and then they read that during school holidays before we even got back on board, to have an idea about, is this the right pathway we went to? In the very first meetings that we ever had in the school when we with positive psychology, was we put the elephant on the table, and I had the 20 leaders of the school sitting around the table saying, what are our concerns about if we go down this POSET world? And it was actually a lot of them were turning around saying, well, I can't see why we shouldn't. And at that stage with the Mount Barker High School, we were in pretty big hurt. The school had a pretty checkered history. Wasn't well recepted by the local community. We had students leaving the school in droves, so the school got down to just about 470 students, and the public perception of the school was really poor. So we were in a process of how do we reculture the school, and how do we actually show the community that we're a really good, viable place for teaching and learning. In now 11 years on in my principalship, is actually I've still got the same staff that were here 11 years ago. So our retention of staff has been significant. So really, and Matthew would have relayed that to a couple of weeks ago, is actually start off reading some of the literature, hop onto the PISA website, have a look around what's available, look at some of the work. And what you've got to do is, from a principal's point of view, is actually, and a school community, is how do you actually put this into the culture of the school? And how do you make it, like the really hard part is actually, let's not make it surface, let's make it deep. And I talk about DNA. In our 8 years, we would say positive education is part of the DNA of the school. This is what the school runs like. And so if we have a change in leadership, there's a significant group of staff that won't let this go. They see the value of it, they believe in it, and our students and our community believe in it too. So to really to go back, read some literature, trial some of the areas. But if you have the opportunity, train 1 or 2 staff members, and there's a range of training opportunities around Australia, and get them to become champions and then share that knowledge. You need to have your leadership team on the same page. One teacher can make some change with their sphere of influence, but you need the leadership. So fortunately, Mount Barker High School, I was very passionate about POSED, and so from my direction of the school and what their vision for the school, when we collaboratively workshopped our school vision, it all underpinned each other. So it was actually a collective team on a collective vision and a collective journey. So that was the way of doing it. So realistically, read, learn a little bit about it, and try a little bit in classes. You can't go too wrong.
Warren, thank you.
There was one question that someone said about, I've read the chat about what measurement tool.
Yes.
In South Australia, we used the Wellbeing Engagement Collection tool. It started as the Middle Years Development Index. It's actually, for South Australian schools, it's a free tool that we can use. Currently, all our students at Mount Barker High School are undergoing that survey right now. It's linked in with some of the research from University of Pennsylvania using the EPOC. You can actually get hold of the EPOC if you just do a quick Google search. PISA can guide you in some direction of that, and you can actually generate your own little survey tools. We used the range of tools. We found that we couldn't find one being a pub. We couldn't really. There were some tools out there that were too expensive to use. There were tools that we used in collaboration with University of Adelaide and in some Flinders University. So we had some of our tertiary institutions working with us. They weren't sustainable. The Department for Education South Australia developed a survey tool that all schools in South Australia use. So we actually are now using that tool across the school. It started off only in the years 4 to years 9, and now it's actually 4 to year 12. So one of those things that we're very lucky to do. That tool has been rolled out throughout some other states and jurisdictions internationally. So yeah, we were lucky to use that, have that access to that tool. So that's where all that data came from that I showed you, was from the WEC. Sorry, Bron.
Thank you. No problems, Warren. Thank you. Would anyone else like to ask any questions there? I do see there is one, but on a very practical note, just about sharing your PowerPoint slides at the end there, Warren, which I think we can respond to as well.
Yeah, just looking at one said something about a quote from the Dalai Lama.
Yes,
I haven't read that one, so I haven't looked at that one too. But
That's me.
Sorry. The catchphrase. Yeah.
Sorry, that's me. I didn't finish. I pressed send before I finished typing because, you know, I'm the same as you. But we always use that. I've got posters everywhere around the school. I always finish every assembly with the Dalai Lama's quote that be kind whenever possible. It's always possible. So, you know, I've got that up all the time, and all the kids always say it back to me all the time, because I say, be kind whenever it's possible. What comes next? It's always possible. I find it very useful.
Yeah. So,
thank you, Debbie.
firstly, for the story of Mount Barker High School, we use that typical African proverb, it takes a village to raise a child. And
yes, yeah.
we constantly, we go back to there and saying, trying to work out the wraparound services, the support that a young person needs to flourish. And that's the concept that we're trying to do. We want them to thrive in the world. Yes. So that one's always resonates with me. And when people talk about a whole of community approach, we're on the brink of actually having a whole of Mount Barker community involved.
Right.
It didn't get the final traction, and where there's a will, it's been able to do it from the opposite way. We haven't. Pauline and I have talked on fairly regular occasions about where we're moving and how we actually each organisation's doing. So yeah, we've still got a lot to go. I also have to be mindful of the direction of our local department, and I've got to follow ensuring that I actually are following the departmental guidelines on that one. So our reach to the community has been pulled back a lot, but we will share as much as we possibly can, because it's just not for us alone. And a little bit of the catchphrase, that's our logo of the school, not for us alone.
Yeah, I saw that. That's nice.
We pay as much forward as possible. Yeah. And that's been in the school since 1908, so 112 years of not for ourselves alone. And we are a community develop schools. So we give back as much as we can to the community too.
Nice.
And our
Warren,
students do a lot of work in the community. So
sorry, Warren, to cut you off there, and Debbie. Thank you both. Warren, there's 2 questions that have come through, and I'm just wondering if we've got time to answer them. Folks, I am mindful that we're about 5 minutes to the hour, so we may just go over a tiny bit, but probably worth answering if we can.
I'm happy to.
So the first one there from Genevieve, interested in the vertical house group approach. Is there any research out there to support it?
There is, but I actually don't have the name. The guy's called Peter in the United Kingdom. He's what we'd call the guru of vertical house structures. I can probably forward that information on to Bron, that can be shared. He's written a fairly robust book about how to the value of vertical house groups. The research shows that for the evidence of schools that introduce a vertical house structure, you need to actually have that large gap in the students. So sometimes I call it like the family group, because you've got a year 7 and a year 12 in the group. The evidence shows that by introducing a vertical house structure, you reduce bullying and harassment. You actually increase the connection of sense of belonging, because you try to keep that house teacher with that group of students for the whole learning. So they get to know the students quite well, and the families know that one. So it's a one-point shop. So when there's something going wrong at school, the parents talk to one person, and then they hold the knowledge and share that with the rest of the school. So there is one about reducing bullying and harassment, a stronger sense of connections with an adult, and also a sense of belonging. So we've incorporated the sports house structure into it. So we're expanding our house structure from sports across the board. We have a whole range of different inter-house competitions. There's points generated for whatever students do in the school. The other part about which I was about to say something, in my mind went somewhere else, was there's a strong mentoring approach. And so what we're getting our students to do is actually to work with each other. So our year 11s and 12s actually undergo some formal training in how to be a mentor and share their skills and knowledge. So the beautiful thing that we're hoping to do is actually potentially have a year 7 student who's strong in literacy to support a year 12 student. Right, not the opposite way around. And so we can actually use the strengths of your group to actually support the group to grow. So I can forward that. Sorry, I can't remember. His first name's Peter. And during COVID, he was actually very generous this time. He was providing school free consultation service. So the literature is a bit loose about horizontal and vertical house groups. And one outweighs the other, but we believe the vertical structure is going to be the right structure for the school to move our positive education, but our whole culture of the school to that next level.
Warren,
the other one was about learning disabilities. Is that the other one? Yeah. So we do a lot of work with our students with disabilities in our disability unit. One of them is actually doing the self-regulation, engaging it. So we've got a nice little flow chart with, it's that animated cartoon about, the girl's head that's got all her emotions, and it goes pear-shaped eventually, and then they come back. I can't remember the name of it, but we use those as graphics because the students like seeing it. And it's actually talking about, I'm feeling a little bit anxious or a little bit excited. So we might say they're angry. Instead of using the words, I feel calm and connected and that sort of stuff, that could be actually a negative emotion for a student with a disability, because they're actually down. So they might need some pepping up. And so we've got to work on how to actually build it. So when they're in an excited state, it's not saying I'm angry. As I said, my emotions are too excited. So I actually need to do something about my self-regulation. So they'll identify that sometimes with a little sticker on the wall when they walk into a classroom, put a little point on it, or they may have a little tag on the desk that they might just put their pen over top of it. So when the teacher's going past, they can see what emotional state they're in, and so they can support them. So there's a lot of work on doing that one. And we talk about different types of, we go through what are emotions, relationships with the students. So there's a range of different skills that we work on. And Marita's just shared me with, it's Peter Barnard, who's the guru from the UK. So thank you, Marita. Marita happens to be the CE of PISA too. So thanks for sharing that, Marita. But there's a little bit more work to do with our disabilities. And so a range of skills. So all the staff there, we've got 6 special needs teachers, which have undertaken a whole wide range of training in POS Ed, and they have developed an individualised POS Ed approach for the students in the unit. And yeah, that's working extremely well, but I'm not really giving you the full one. That's probably another half an hour conversation about how we actually work with students with intellectual and learning disabilities.
Maybe a theme for another webinar.
Yeah, and Rebecca, thank you. Inside Out, yeah, sorry. That's what happens. You just forget. So yeah. I'm very honest. So thank you, and thanks for the support from the participants.
Teamwork, I think, is
yes.
I should say there. So Warren, and to everyone online today, can I just say thank you firstly to Warren for your very generous sharing of your school's experience and the leadership that you have shown there. Certainly incredibly practical and thoughtful responses. So thank you very, very much. To those who have joined in and contributed to the solution finding and also to sharing your questions, thank you very much for your participation. I think together it really does highlight, as we started, the importance and the interest in this particular area and the impact that it can have on student learning. So thank you, Warren. Can I also, just whilst on thank yous, extend a thanks to my colleague Honor, who has been working behind the scenes to bring together our webinar today. So thank you very much for what you do. And as I say, to each of you, thank you very much for your participation. Just following up on some of the questions there, as I mentioned, we will share a recording of the webinar today of Warren's presentation and your questions. So we will have that available to you, and work also, I think, Warren, to sharing some of or all of the presentation as well. But also, as part of that communication, we will provide links where appropriate, or at least the references that Warren has referred to, so that you have those at hand. So look out for those within, it'll probably take us a week to turn that around for you, but do look out for that and we'll be in touch with it. I also wanted, just as we are closing, to just put a little promotion out there for our next webinar in this series. It's going to be held on Tuesday, the 4th of May, 4 o'clock Australian Eastern Standard Time by that time, not summertime. And Julie Murphy, also one of the 2020 Teaching Fellows, will be presenting on the work that she's been leading at Elizabeth Vale School around introducing trauma-informed practice to prepare their students to be ready to learn. So we will certainly be putting reminders out about that, but we would love you, if it's of interest to you, or maybe to your colleagues also, to have you online for that conversation. I also just draw to your attention to the Schools Plus website has just recently had a refresh. And a part of that, we have established what we're calling our knowledge sharing hub. And there we'll share resources that have been shared as part of our knowledge sharing activities. But certainly if you have material that you have used and have found effective and successful as a part of your work in your schools, we'd be really keen to be able to share that more broadly as well. So please feel free to touch base with us should you have any information there that you'd like us to share with this group of people that we've been communicating with this afternoon. So on that note, I think I will draw us to a close. Thank you again for your participation. Really, really appreciate you coming online. Take care. Good luck for the rest of the term. And yes, thank you very much for being here today. And thanks again, Warren. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, everyone. Ms. Denise.